Today, I'm going to be showing you how to host a webinar that closes tons of clients for your business. This method has worked for me and many of my clients. Trust me, it works. Now, in case you're wondering, why do you need a webinar? 1 minute. If you're a service provider, it's half and half. A webinar may not exactly be suited to the kind of service that you provide, and that's fine. You can check out the video here where I talk about application funnels for high-ticket services. But if you're a coach or course creator, I'm sure that at some point creating a webinar must have crossed your mind, and this video is definitely for you. So why do you need a webinar? When you're selling high-ticket services, you really need to build trust, build it fast, get people to know you, and a webinar does that for you. In a collapsed amount of time, you're able to deliver massive value. You're able to pre-qualify leads. What does that mean? You're getting them to see whether or not you might be the best person to solve the problem they have. You're also showing them your teaching style. I mean, as a coach or a course creator, you want people to be able to say, oh, I like the way this person teaches, or this doesn't work for me. So a webinar is very, very, very great. If you haven't considered using one, you probably should. Welcome back. If you're new to my channel, my name is Chris-Amusan, and I help service providers, coaches, course creators who are struggling to find clients online to create a strategy and build a funnel that helps them get consistent and predictable income in their business. If this sounds like you, or this is content that you think you want to sign up for, you should hit the subscribe button, turn on the bell icon so that you don't miss out every time I release a new video every single week. So there are 3 common ways by which you can deliver a webinar. The first is a live webinar. You're familiar with this. You create a registration page, you send some traffic to that page, people sign up, you've set a date, they're aware of the date. On the day of the webinar, they show up, you teach live, live webinar. Many coaches and course creators use this for their launches, so it's very, very straightforward. There's also an automated webinar. In this case, you could either pre-record, or when you host your live webinar, you take that recording and set it up on automation. And what does that mean when I say automation? You take this recording, you put it up on a platform where people can watch it on demand. So for example, someone sees a prompt to register for your automated webinar. They're landing on a page that is asking for their email address. The moment they put that in and submit, they get an email in their inbox that gives them the link to watch the pre-recorded webinar that you set up. Or the moment they sign up, you redirect them to a page where this webinar has been set up. There's a software that actually allows you to deliver an automated webinar in a very natural way. One of the ones I've used that I trust is EverWebinar. Very, very good. It sort of simulates the live element. So when people try to sign up for the webinar, it asks them what dates they want to choose. So they sort of get this sense like they're in a live environment. Typically, if you don't tell people, they might not know when you use EverWebinar. And EverWebinar also has this really incredible feature where you could take the chats that happened during the live session, right, and feed it into the software, and those chats come up on the screen when people are watching the pre-recorded webinar. It's very sleek. The third is the hybrid webinar. People show up live. You're there to welcome people, build rapport, warm up the room. However, at the time where you need to start teaching, you plug in the pre-recorded webinar. There are some people who do this, what I'll maybe call like unethical, or maybe like a gray hat mechanism, where they don't really tell people that it's what they're watching is pre-recorded. I recommend, if you want to do a hybrid webinar, you welcome people live, let them know that you're about to plug in the recording. Once that is done, you come back up to take questions and answers and whatnot. Why do people even do hybrid? In case you're wondering, not everybody is confident enough to sit and host a live webinar, trust me. So this is really, really helpful for people who need a controlled environment. And for some, they probably just need to ensure that they are sticking to time. They are able to, go back and do some post-production, edit the webinar, and deliver something that's perfect, right? So if you're a perfectionist, a hybrid webinar would work perfectly for you. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about how to set up a webinar that would actually get you clients. Now, webinars are popular because they're a great way to generate leads, high quality leads for that matter. But there is a method to the madness if you want to get your webinar to convert to clients. I'm going to break down the things you need to do into pre-webinar, during the webinar, and post. So let's talk about what are the things you need to put in place before your webinar to ensure that you're able to get the kind of conversions that you're looking for. The first thing is you want to ensure that you have a good show-up rate. What does this mean? 1,000 people could sign up for your webinar and only 50 people show up. Trust me, that could happen. So to increase show-up rate, I highly recommend if you're setting up a free webinar, you start promotions 2 weeks before the webinar, nothing more. If you're doing a free webinar, do not start promoting that webinar a month before, 2 months before. Why? People will sign up and forget. If it's a paid webinar where you know that you need some extra priming to get people to pay, fine. But for a free webinar, 2 weeks is the sweet spot. Start your promotions 2 weeks prior. Also, set a target for the number of people you want in the room. The typical show up rate for a live webinar or a live online event, really, that is free is 25 to 30%. What does this mean? If you actually want to have 100 people live in the room, you would need an average of 300 registrations. Yes. There are certain scenarios that defy this rule. So if you already had an audience that you've primed, you've engaged, you may have a very higher show up rate. But if you're running promotions to your webinar using ads, you want to work with this, right? How many people do I want in the room? And know that 25 to 30% of people that register is, that's the number you will have live, and plan for that, prepare ahead. Next, you want to engage them from the day they register. So when people sign up for your webinar, they need to get a confirmation email immediately. And then you can set up an automation that ensures that maybe the next day after they've signed up, they get an email that tells them your backstory, a little more about you, why you do what you do, just so you can build familiarity. You could even engage with them, tell them to send you a question. What's the biggest thing that's bothering you about your business if you're a business coach? Or what's the biggest issue that plagues you when it comes to losing weight if you're a fitness coach, right? Engage. You could also ask them to follow you on Instagram. That way, you're still in their faces in the period before your webinar. Now, you also want to ensure that you have reminder emails set up. Best practice is, apart from the fact that you'll be engaging, so if 2 weeks prior, right, on the day of, you sent your confirmation email. The day after, they get an email that builds rapport. You could maybe insert 1 or 2 more that go out in between for people who may register super early, right? But best practice, the day before, you should have an email go out. The day before, you should have an email go out. The morning of, an email go out an hour before, and an email go out at the time your webinar goes live. You could either do that at the time of, or maybe 5-15 minutes before the webinar starts, right? And then some people even go the extra mile. I'm an extra person, right? Go the extra mile and send another webinar, maybe like 15 minutes into the webinar, because typically by that time you're now about to start teaching proper. An email that says, oh, we're live, you're missing out, that kind of email, right? That is best practice. You want to increase show up rates, okay? All your prep, everything you've put in place for this webinar will not matter if people don't show up. So this is key. Next, you want to prepare your slides ahead and rehearse before the day of the webinar. Now, rehearsal can be as elaborate as asking your friends to come watch you present, or it could be as simple as you going through your slides, imagining that you're presenting. You could just speak to yourself. You don't have to talk out loud, depending on how good you are in front of a camera, in front of a virtual audience. If you think that you get jittery, you get nervous, you get stage fright, you want to rehearse, maybe on average like 3 times ahead of the day, get familiar with those slides. And I'm saying slides because, yes, you need to prepare slides. It would really help you stay on track and maintain your line of thought on the D-Day. Finally, before the webinar, this is the last thing you need to do before the webinar, have your next step ready. What's the call to action for your webinar? Are you sending people to apply to work with you? If that's the case, you need to have that booking, your application form ready. The booking process has to be ready. If you're sending people direct to go and make payment for your course or your program, you need to have that payment set up ready before the day of the webinar. Try to avoid doing things last minute, especially if you're launching. Launches can be so hectic, and the last thing you want is to be running around helter-skelter just a few minutes to your webinar. I've done it, trust me, it's not nice. What are the things you need to do during the webinar? Remember, eyes on the money, eyes on the prize, y'all. You're trying to get people to pay for your offer. So you mustn't lose sight of that. Don't get distracted. Don't lose guard. The first thing is keep your eyes on the time. On average, your webinar should last, if it's a sales webinar, you're trying to pitch something at the end of this webinar, should last on average 90 minutes. Some people do 60, some people do 2 hours. I only recommend doing as long as 2 hours or more if you are, you have a very warm audience. If you're an OG, you've been doing this for a long time, people are all over you, right? But if you're still new to the world of webinars and all of that, just short and sweet. Get out of there while the ovation is loud. So I'll say 90 minutes is good best practice, right? Keep your eyes on the time. not too short, not too long. And you also want to ensure that you stick to the script. Don't don't deviate. I remember my first sales webinar. Like prior to then, I had delivered a lot of classes, speaking engagements. So I felt like I'm good, but I was very shocked to realize that a sales webinar is slightly different. That point where you have to pitch your offer, trust me, it's very nerve-wracking. I remember I left that webinar and I decided, you know what, I'm not going to pitch. I'm just going to close this class. I legit froze. And this is coming from me, where I've had like massive experience delivering live classes and all of that. So you must remember this. If you intend to close clients at the end of your webinar, remember what I said earlier, rehearse, but have your slides, keep your eyes on the time, and stick to the script. Now, there's one thing about using slides. You don't want your slides to be like text logged. I don't know if that's an English word, where you just have like so much text on the screen. Keep it very simple. You could have your notes where nobody can see your notes, but let your slides be very bright, beautiful, well spaced, and not like too much of clutter. Why? Because it's also a visual experience for people in that session, right? So if you're delivering a shabby visual experience, that's already making a very poor first impression with your brand. We don't want to make that mistake. The next thing is, of course, ensure that you have good lighting, everywhere is quiet, the kids are like with the nanny or with daddy and there's no noise or whatever. You just want to ensure that you're delivering a great experience. Yes, it's good to be down to earth where your kid can come and you have all of that, but remember, you're trying to like pull all the stops. As you age with your work, you can get away with some things, right? But if you're still fairly new to this process, you want to ensure that you're keeping things very, very clean. So the stages, you can break up your webinar into priming, teaching, the pitching, and then Q&A, right? So that's 4 sections. Now, the priming should last on average 10 minutes. You teach for 45 minutes on average. You pitch 20 minutes. And yes, you're like, okay, for 20 minutes, yes, I'll explain, I'll break it down. And then Q&A for 15 minutes. The pitch and the Q&A are sort of like lumped together. So if your pitch doesn't take so long, you could just like switch over into the Q&A. Now, what do I mean when I say prime? When you join, when your webinar starts, right, first of all, you should have been on like 15 minutes ahead. Just have your picture be on the screen or the cover slide of your presentation, and you could have some music in the background. So you're just on there, because some people are early birds. You don't want someone joining as an early bird and they leave because you are late. So join early, be punctual, life skill, amen. And then once on the dot of the time when your webinar starts, you start to welcome people. You should have pinned a comment there asking people to introduce themselves. For me, I'm a business coach, so I typically like people to say what industry they are in, where they are from, or what they hope to learn. So you could pin that so that as people join, they see that pinned comment and they are able to start engaging already, right? And as people join, you're also like calling out names. You're just saying hello to everybody as they join. Now, the moment you do that for about 2-3 minutes or 5 minutes, this also depends on how quickly people join, right? Which is why you should have sent a reminder email. If people join very quickly, within 5 minutes, you should be starting. And you start by pre-framing. So what are you doing? You're saying this webinar is for you, or you're in the right place if this is you. So you start to like sort of get them to self-identify. You're calling out their pain points. You also do what we call future pacing, where you're saying, imagine if you could get this, 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 and that. But there's actually a template for webinar slides. Probably want to let me know in the comments if you want that template, and I will see how I can put it up. But if you can follow with this, that's also fine. And so you get them to self-identify by pointing out their pain points, future pacing, that's painting the future that they desire, and getting them to identify that, oh yeah, this is something I would like to see in my near future, in my business, or in my body if you're a fitness coach, or in my family if you're a marital or parenting coach. And then you also take like a few minutes to share testimonials. Like, this is what this person had to say after working with me. At this point, you're not teaching, right? You are pre-framing. You're getting people to identify. But at the same time, you're sort of beating time, because by the time you've done this for the first 10 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on how you really break down the stages of your webinar, you already have a full house, and now you can start teaching, once the intro section is over. Very brilliant, right? Yes, I know. And so teach, I highly recommend you have like 3 lessons. Of course, how you organize it you have to sort of do a bit of comparison to say, maybe here's Josephine and maybe here is Julia. Josephine is the unideal person. Josephine is where they currently are, and you're pointing out how that Josephine has these struggles. However, this is what Julia does right. that differentiates her from Josephine. So you want to introduce a bit of storytelling into the things that you're teaching. Take 3 lessons. Some people do 5, depending on how fast you talk. But I typically do 3, and then maybe I could add like a few bonus points that I briefly touch on. But for those 3, I really, really, really teach. So like 10 minutes for each of the 3 lessons, and the remaining 15 minutes, I just touch on the bonus points in and out. Now let's talk about the pitch. Remember, I've said you need to prep your pitch and have it on your slides because you don't want to freeze like I did when I first started out putting out these kinds of webinars. Pitch with confidence. One key thing you need to do before you pitch is ask permission. And there's a very, very brilliant way to approach this. Now, first of all, you should have mentioned in the intro portion of your webinar that you'll be telling them about your program at the end. For people who wait to the end, you reward them with a free gift. So you could have like maybe a very short PDF, a checklist, or a bonus video that you want to give people who wait till the end of the video, stuff like that. Kiva, how will I know people who wait to the end of my video? It depends on the kind of software you're using, right? If you're using Webinar Jam, I think Webinar Jam really shows you the analytics and tags people. If you're using an automated webinar as well, I know Katra that I've used will show you at what point people, jumped off the webinar. But if you're not using sophisticated software, keep it simple and just don't say that. So let's move on. And so you tell them, I'm going to talk about my program. Remember that now you're done with the teaching section and you want to proceed to your pitch. So before you move on to the pitch, you want to ask for permission. So you say something like, if you've learned anything from this section, give me like an emoji in the comments. People are like, yes, I've learned so much. Thank you, Coach Kiva. You're the best. And that's like the perfect time to be like, all right, so I have a program where I help people that are XYZ, get this result in this amount of time. Let me know if you'd like for me to tell you more about my program. Of course, by this point, people are already saying yes. So nobody's going to come and say no, right? So that's an easy way to get permission. Because really, when you want to pitch, you want to know that you've gotten their buy-in. So that is very key. And you see why you need to rehearse, because you don't want to stutter. I actually add this to my slides, really. So I'm just like reading it off, that particular section especially. Okay, so now you're about to pitch. The breakdown of your pitch is, first of all, be very clear and precise. Tell them the name of your program, how long it lasts for. You could walk them through the breakdown of your models, and then also tell them who it is for. This program is ideal for this kind of person. And also tell them who it is not for. This program may not work for you if you're XYZ. For example, I've told you about myself, right? My methods may not work for someone who doesn't have a business. Like, how are you even going to apply the things we're teaching? If you don't believe in having a marketing budget, my method may not work for you, because at some point you may need to run ads, you may need to pay someone, you may need to outsource some things. So you want to just highlight those things. What are you doing? You're pre-qualifying. You're getting people to self-identify. That way, the people in your audience are thinking, okay, I have no problem doing this. So I think working with Kiva would work for me. And for someone who may not believe in some of those things you're mentioning, they're like, oh yeah, you know what, Kiva, not my coach, and they won't even bother going to the next step, which is good. It's a win-win. You don't want the wrong kind of people coming into your program and then they give you problems further down the line. After you've done the who is it for, who is it not for, you could slide in a few more testimonials. If you have a video testimonial, you could actually play a video testimonial on your webinar. Very, very good. And then you talk about the pricing, you ask them to buy. There is really a method to how you go about the pricing. There's something called anchoring, right? Where if my program, for example, is $1,500, or let's say 3K, my program is 3K, and I have an installment plan. Maybe my installment plan is 1,000 in 3 installments, rather than start with that, because for some of us, we think that it's better to start by telling people, oh yeah, you can join at 1K. Start by anchoring the higher price in their mind. Why? There are people, once you create the anchor in their mind, first, you're letting people who can afford to pay you that 3K at once jump at that opportunity. But at the same time, if you now let them know that there is an easier offer, people who were like, oh my God, 3K, they're already stretching their minds to think about how they can make that work. And so when you let them know, oh, there's an easier way, they're like, oh my gosh, thank God, and they jump on that. So you want to try to anchor, if you have different pricing plans, you want to try to anchor the higher one in their minds before you give them like the really, really easy one. And yes, if you're doing high tickets, I recommend having payment plans because it helps, especially if your program is going to be stretched out for a long period of time. And then finally, if you were going to give them a gift for sticking to the end, now is a good time to tell them how they can get the gift. Remember that with your pricing, you're attaching a call to action. So whether that call to action is for them to go to the payment page to check out, or whether that is for them to book a call with you. If you are leading them into your application funnel, which I highly recommend, by the way, that has to be set up before the webinar, and you're leading them straight into that. Finally, the Q&A. I presume that all the while when you've been teaching, you've been telling people if they have questions to put it in the chat, you'll come back to it. So now you can treat those questions, while people may even have questions about how to make payments. So that gives you like a 15-20 minute window to sort of close out on getting some fast action. I typically have a fast action bonus when I'm delivering a sales webinar, a fast action bonus for people who sign up while I'm still on the call. So your Q&A could actually last 30 minutes, to be honest, because there are some people who want to get your fast action bonus before you leave the call. If people don't have questions, what you can do is write out some FAQs, some frequently asked questions, and you cover those questions in that time while you wait for people to ask you questions on how they want to take your next step, how to pay, or how to book the call in case they're having issues. You want to get some people to book that call right there, right then. Now, I'm sure that sounds like a lot, right? Yes, it is a lot. Hosting a webinar when your intent is to close clients, it takes a lot of work. You have to come correct. So what do you do after the webinar? First, on the night of the webinar, well, I said night because I typically host my webinars evening time, but after the webinar, send an email thanking them and also reminding them of their next steps. A summary of your offer, a summary of your program, whatever link they need to book a call or make payments, you need to send that. Do not leave that hanging. People can just go and forget that they attended your webinar, so no, don't leave that to chance. Also, the next day, you want to send the replay, especially for those who may not have attended. If you need to do some post-production, then that needs to be done like very quickly. Or if you think that sending the replay might take longer, you want to let them know in the thank you email that, you will get the replay 48 hours after or 72 hours after. But your team that is cleaning up that video needs to work like really, really fast. Have your sales email sequence go out. Of course, you're having a launch, I presume, right? So there are emails that should go out for minimum 7 days after you've had that webinar, reminding them about your offer and all of that. Your sales email sequence, that is like another topic, so I can't cover that in this video. But if you'd like to see me talk about that, let me know in the comments so I can prioritize, like move it up my list. And then you want to ensure that you fire your retargeting ads. Yes, this is an ad that will target every single person that registered for your ads. Facebook makes it easy. Google makes it easy. You can either feed the email of all the people that signed up for this thing into your ads platform and it will do the retargeting for you. Or when people sign up, there's a pixel or a tag that was installed on that page, right? So you simply tell Facebook or Google to send this new ad to every single person that landed on that page. And what will that ad say? It's simply saying, join the Funnels on Fleek program, application closes soon, that kind of thing. Imagine if I attended your webinar yesterday and I see that ad following me around. If I intended to pay, you would definitely be at the top of my mind, and I won't forget to sign up before the window closes. So very brilliant, right? Yes, I know. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't subscribed to my channel, I wonder what you're waiting for. Go now and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on all my amazing videos. I drop new videos every week. But let's talk about webinars. Have you ever hosted a webinar to sell your service, your program, your course? Were you able to identify anything that you've not been doing so well and now you know what you need to change to start seeing results? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you in the next video.